G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day, and howdy from Oklahoma City. I had no idea Oklahoma City was this stunning. So far, really enjoying it, and I'm on my way up to Nebraska. Now legends, I've missed a couple of days and I apologize. I've been very busy with interviews, travel, everything. But of course today we're going to catch you up, and we do have a lot to go over. So of course we're going to look at the maps, we're going to look at geolocations, look at where things are moving on the maps, as well as some information from behind the scenes about what Russia's next steps may be. And what we are seeing is a lot of pushing in the south, and what are then the goals. And then we're going to talk about the situation and how weapons are influencing the front line, something that we have spoken about, for a long time. Mainstream media starting, I guess, to then accept that this is the reality of the deterioration and effect of these weapon systems. But I want to show you more of these tactics in action today. We'll talk about an increase in Garand, but not only an increase in it, but a decrease in the ability to actually counter these as well. We need to look at the situation in the Russian Air Force. From the beginning of the war, the Russian Air Force has greatly underperformed, as expected from everyone from the Pentagon to the Kremlin. So we have a lot. So let's start here and talk about a weapon system that has been in the battlefield and in a strategic and tactical sense for some time. But what we know is that due to the manufacturing of these then 10xing, that these are being used in a much more effective way. And what we're talking about is the Garand drones. Of course, based on as an analog of an Iranian Shahed 136. But no, these are not a Shahed 136. It is an analog of the system. The purchasing of the licensing, the paying of that, whether in resource or money, to create this weapon system that we see the Russians have then evolved in models too. But I think a lot of people don't understand how large these actually are. And we have this gentleman here standing next to one of these that was intercepted by electronic warfare and downed. You can get an idea of how large these are. And these can carry a 90-kilogram warhead. But we see more and more pages speaking like this. And this gentleman here says there's no way to shoot these things down. They appear from thousands of meters where bullets cannot reach, and then nosedive at full speed into their target. The only possibilities are interceptor missiles, which the US has stopped due to a shortage of their own weapon systems, as well as more countries needing them outside of Ukraine as well. And this is what we have spoken about with the newer variants and updates of the Garands, the increase in the airframe itself, engine, they're going higher. So a bullet just does that. Gravity is a bullet's worst enemy. And these are flying above that. So anything from the Gepard to the mounted 50 cals are just not having the effect anymore. And as they're coming back down, well, due to the airframe increasing, they can dive much faster. So that period of time which you are actually in range of the machine guns has been greatly limited. And not only is there that increase, the manufacturing is significant. And now we see Ukraine looking for more air defense against these and looking outside of the box. We see this, the air defense system will be strengthened by volunteer formations from territorial communities, which will be placed on civilian aircraft to shoot down Shahed or Garands, deputy head of the main directorate here. So civilians who have been removed from military registration, who say they have a medical condition or some reason that they can't be fighting in the war, may participate in these formations. However, preference will be given to reserve servicemen who know how to pilot an aircraft. So, if you're exempt from military service and you've got some experience, then as a pilot or in airframes, now there is a specific element completely open for these people to go and participate in the war. Participate in the war more so than just monetizing your countrymen as well. They also receive combat pay. The Air Force are responsible for training the crews to carry out the tasks. The participants will use civilian aircraft, which will be registered by the Temporary Register of Experimental Aircraft, carry out these combat missions, so hitting these in the air. Now, we see a lot in this. We see civilians removed from service, civilian aircraft. As soon as they step into that capacity, they are no longer civilian servicemen, they're no longer civilians, they are servicemen, and those aircraft, whether it's a glider or an F-16, is not a civilian aircraft at that point. And that was my biggest criticism of when there was pushing, when Russians were moving in and around Kiev, of build Molotov cocktails, because at that point you stop becoming a civilian. Okay, so yeah, open up for, if anyone knew anyone who was a civilian, I guess, pilot who's exempt from registration, that can actually go to counter these weapons which are having a devastating effect all across Ukraine. And we see this, and this is just a count over the past couple of days. Of course, clearly the production, the manufacturing has increased dramatically, and Ukraine's counters to this have decreased as well. The interception rate is lower while the production is higher. And just since the 3rd of July, from very rough numbers that I'm seeing, there was 1,119 Garand and Garand decoys in the air. Now, likely it's around that number somewhere, but very likely we will see that increase too. We're seeing over hundreds a day sometimes. Now, this is from Fighter Bomber in the Air Force update that he gave overall. I've taken bits out to add it in areas too. As I've said before, due to the enemy's limited supply of air defence, surface-to-air missiles, our aviation now has more operational freedom. And as I've also mentioned, enemy air defence systems are always the top priority target in the special military operation, striking AD. Of course, we're still far away from achieving full air superiority, but the situation is finally beginning to move in the right direction. So he's saying it's getting better, but we're still a long way from where we would like it to be. And this is one of the byproducts of that massive manufacturing increased ability to target of the Garands, is these aren't specifically there to actually just take out as far as targets. They're there to tie up any sort of surface-to-air missiles, any air defence, limit that. So then the either from frontline tactical use of these to strategic use, they are a force multiplier then for something like an Iskander, that it's tying up air defence, there's less of it, and then your higher end weapons then do the real destruction. And I'm not saying that these don't cause a lot of destruction, of course they do. And then we see this, we see Mr. Yuri Ignat, who I've talked about before, spokesman for the Ukrainian Air Force, speak about the difficulty with Iskanders. It's not easy to shoot down ballistic missiles, only the Patriot can shoot them down. But it also has its strengths and weaknesses. It is guided to the target by radar, and to provide cover for a city as big as Kiev, several Patriot batteries are needed. In addition, modernised Iskanders have been flying for more than 6 months. They manoeuvre when approaching the target. It's become more difficult for the Patriot systems to intercept them. And the actual interception rate of these Iskanders seems to be very, very low. And as I said, these are working in tandem with all that other air defence in the air. Air defence, those other aerial assets such as the Garands. Now let's actually have a look at the overall situation, what is happening on the front line. I think I'll probably have the title of a new tactic, but it's not. It's just more accepted now. And let's have a look at this, and I'll show you an overlay of the maps. Russian forces have carved out a 10-mile deep pocket around the Ukrainian troops defending Konstantinivka. Practically every movement in that pocket is targeted by Russian drones around the clock. Troops are often stranded for weeks without rotation and the possibility of evacuating the wounded. This gentleman says here it's extremely difficult to deliver supplies or to rotate troops. So let's have a look at where we are talking about. I'll show you the maps in depth a little bit more later, but we see Konstantinivka right in here, and this pocket that has then been developed all the way down to Toretsk area, say 15, 16 kilometers deep. And of course, these drones, they're not just flying from here, they're flying from the flanks as well. That saturation we talk about, it increases. Either way, Ukrainian soldiers say Russia's expanded drone strike capacity gives it an edge it did not have during previous assaults. Before, they could hit targets within 2 or 3 kilometers. Now they're striking every 10 to 20 minutes at a consistent range of 15 kilometers on the front line. Everything within 15 kilometer zone is being destroyed. And this is the problem when you have a pocket that is less than that and the flanks are less than that then everything is being targeted. So if we look at somewhere like Pokrovsk, well, all of these logistical routes in and out from the flanks as well are getting targeted and hammered. And we'll talk about the attritional nature of a pocket. When asked about the turning point in Russia's new drone campaign, Alexander, as well as other Ukrainian soldiers, all point to the same name, Rubicon, an elite Russian drone unit. The group made its mark this year in Kursk region of western Russia, where it helped push back invading Ukrainian forces by cutting off their main supply road. Now, Kursk is where we really saw Russia lift its game on drones. We saw the fiber optics absolutely cause chaos around Kursk into Sumy, logistics routes used by this Rubicon, but also then used in specialty FSB units and everything that we had seen as well. We saw them used up there, and then we saw them trickle down into areas in the south and the east. And what this did was it had a vertical envelopment of areas as well. This Rebecca, I won't try and pronounce that, sorry, but American volunteer says the game changed when they came here. So let's talk about vertical envelopment and when you have a huge amount of drones like this. So we talk about Kursk, okay? So let's just quickly draw in. This is why you need to expand your front line as much as possible to desaturate your enemy's drones. And this is the biggest criticism in Kursk, was it was never widened. It went too deep but didn't widen. This is what I talk about in Turn E, which we'll look at, of why Russia's trying to widen that, is to desaturate Ukraine's drones. So let's say Ukraine looked like this at one point, and that this in here isn't that wide, okay? So you had the Russian drone units on three sides around here, and what they were able to do is vertically envelop by flying and striking targets on their supply routes into here. Remember, the supply routes into Suja, into Kursk, was very, very limited. That's another reason you want to expand widthways as well. But it was able to vertically envelop by then just mass of these drones here too. And we'll talk about why that is devastating on the front line at the moment in tandem with other systems. Russian strike groups, Russian strikes around Konstantinivka are so constant that Ukrainian troops avoid leaving their underground shelters altogether. We joke that going to the bathroom is practically a heroic act now. And this is where one weapon system needs to work in tandem with others. I talk about war as an organism. It needs to be all working together. You push here and it hurts over there. And this is an arm of Russia's strategy. We've been calling it the paint by numbers. Other people will call it the three-prong or the triple whatever it bloody is. We just call it the paint by numbers because it seems like Russia's doing this again and again. Flanks, drones, TOS, FABs, assault, okay? But what the drones are doing is the drones, they're holding troops in place. These drones, they're not devastating against bunkers, underground areas. They're too small, at least en masse for that. But what they can do is hold in place, keep you stagnant, then TOS, thermobaric, then FABs, strike the hardened areas, devastating those areas. And what we need to take into account in this is the entire battle sequence that many people leave out, that they believe the fight for Pokrovsk, the fight for Bakhmut, the fight for Avdiivka is just the battle itself when the troops enter. And they forget then to take into account the entire battle sequence. And this is why people will claim the Russian losses are 10 times, 20 times higher than Ukraine. And this skews that figure massively. So what am I talking about? Well, let's go to Pokrovsk and talk about this as probably an area we'll just use as an example for now. And you may have seen me share this before. It is true that the attacking force sometimes or often suffers higher casualties in assault operations than the defending force. The 3-to-1 number, that isn't, in military terms, that's not what that number is. That number is a preference for offensive actions, that if we in the infantry want to take a village, we want 3 times numbers. It's not a rule of thumb saying we're going to suffer 3 times the casualties like people use online. However, the assault is only the final act in a long process. As you noted, the Russians follow a paint-by-numbers formula, and what pro-Ukrainian commentators often don't acknowledge is that these preparations conducted by the Russians cause huge casualties. This is admitted by the Ukrainians on the front line, and furthermore, Russia would not continue to invest such massive resources to conduct these preparatory operations if they didn't have this effect. So before the official assault even happens, the Ukrainians are often down hundreds of men in a given locality. During the actual assault, maybe it is true the Russians lose 3-1 men, I don't know. But when the entire battle sequence is considered, the Ukrainians often start defending the assault 100-1 down, it just throws that out there, on account of artillery, drones, thermal barracks, and aviation bombs. Okay? And the reason why I wanted to use Pokrovsk is I've got some footage here. So if we apply the same logic of what's happening in Konstantinivka, of we can barely move, the drones, they're striking everything in and out of here, apply the same logic that this is happening in Pokrovsk. So the troops are held down in here, that the logistics in and out is very, very difficult. And then what Russia does is what we see in the footage released today, is on these areas, well, they fly in and they drop, like we see here, many glide munitions, many FABs, but now also using Garand drones, which can carry out a fairly similar role, to be honest, in a battlefield tactical sense, and flattening many hardened areas like we see here in Pokrovsk. So you hold in place with the drones, you strike then these stagnant targets, hardened areas, and that holds in place. And what I'm getting at in this, and what that gentleman was getting at, what we need to consider, is that in the battle for Pokrovsk, which now we're seeing people say it's not strategically important, as soon as that is said, we know it's fucking on. In the battle for Pokrovsk, it is likely the Russians will lose more troops in offensive infantry armour operations in Pokrovsk. But in these preparatory strikes right now, the Russian CAS around here, as far as from artillery and drones and FABs, is going to be significantly less than what is happening here. You need to take the entire battle sequence. The battle for Pokrovsk started all the way back here. It isn't just once these troops first then enter Pershi, Travneva, or areas like this. And that is what is the tactic at the moment that is moving things around. And of course, just given numbers, very, very hard to counter. So before we continue looking at the maps and where Russia is moving on, especially the eastern flank of Pokrovsk, let's look at glide bombs and how these are developing as well. So we had this bit of footage come out here. I'll just show you, nothing spectacular. You can see that there has been a large explosion, glide munition. Now, where this then is this is in Kryvyi Rih. It's right back here. And what we believe this is, because it was reported as a glide bomb, that this is the new Grom E1 extended range, some 73.5 kilometers just from the line of control across the Dnieper. Now, the range on these is said to be about 120 kilometers. So we're seeing them used against Kryvyi Rih. We've seen them used in Kharkiv. We've seen them used around Sumy as well. And what this is doing is it's moving that aircraft further and further back. And Mr. Fighter Bomber again has spoken about this in his update. So far, the enemy hasn't managed to significantly counter the new Kometa systems, that new aerial system inside of these, because the old one was getting jammed and lost a lot of efficiency, which are essentially guidance kits enabling wide range of weapons to be precisely targeted. However, some isolated cases of successful jamming have already been observed. This was expected relatively soon. The enemy would find a method of countering them. Logically, our technical teams should now develop a 24 beam guidance systems and so on in a geometric progression to stay ahead. It's a cat and mouse game. Also worth noting is the new generation of UMPK, which has been given 3 letters at the end of its designation. This new model allows the FABs, these, to reach even longer ranges, and we are absolutely seeing them entering the battlefield. Of course, they're going to be a more expensive system, so not used en masse like the other systems, but they're going to be dramatically cheaper than some level of more high-end ballistic or cruise missile. Now, let's talk about the south. Of course, we have multiple days to go over. So here is Ukraine, the centre of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, let's come down into the south. Now, we have seen movements around Kamyanskaya in the past week, and as well, Lobkove, Stepove today at a Russian advancement of some, say, 3 kilometers. Again, this isn't in a day. A lot of this has been shown for some time, but we can see confirmed advancement here because all the maps are showing it. Again, Lobkove likely has been under control for some time, but what we do know is Suryak said there was advancement in this section too. So if we have everyone saying there's advancement here on this axis, we know there was definitely some level of advancement. But then we see a lot of pro-Ukrainian pages saying things like this, that Russia has begun to storm Zaporizhia region along the entire front line. Another one saying, for the first time in 3 years, Russia is assaulting the Zaporizhia front along its entire length. So entire line here reports the commander of Ukraine's 65th Brigade. Their objective, reach the Mariupol highway, capture Orokhiv, Kamyansk, and push towards Komishukovka. And where do the Russians want to end up? Well, there's a few areas in this. So Kamyansk, come into Orokhiv, push on this line. But again, what do we talk about? If you're numerically superior, what you're wanting to do is thin out areas. Why do you think we've seen pushing in the north when this exactly happened? You go as far away as possible. Although, a few days ago, a gentleman behind the scenes who has helped me a lot reached out and said this: I think the next Russian main effort is going to be towards Dnipro. Okay? Now, he gives me this little map here. Okay. If they can make and take the Dnipro-Zaporizhia pocket, the red in this, okay, they can more easily push up and close the eastern front from east of Kharkiv to East Dnipro in gold. So if you take this, you can more easily then close this up, allowing them to concentrate forces in Russia with better security and supply and drive to the Dnieper River. What makes me think it's possibly going to focus towards Dnipro is the shaping operations and the relative success they've been having in that direction. It's also fairly logical to pie Ukraine off the river as an axis, in my opinion. And what you're doing is you're using the Dnieper River here as an axis, because of course what this does, bodies of water are the worst possible things in war. Well, worst possible thing to try and cross is you can use this as a leverage that if you push up here, you're only going to be fighting a southern assault or a western assault if you use this to lever off that waterway. And that's what he's talking about. And we spoke about this the other day, me and himself. And now we're seeing not only movements here, but then the Ukrainian page is saying that there is Russian pushing everywhere there too. So let's talk about Pokrovsk. I showed you some footage of Pokrovsk just before regarding those cut-off strikes of the drones, then the FABs. So we have a couple of maps in here to show you. Now what I'm going to do is go over the maps, Deep States update, incomplete, and then we'll step back just as a bit of a brain refresher for myself. So it is the 7th of July today. Let's step back. The last time I spoke to you, I believe, was on the 3rd. Let's see if this looks like the updates we got on the 3rd. Yes, it was. Let's step up to then the 4th of July and all the celebrations and sadly the catastrophic event that occurred in Texas on the 4th of July. I believe we may have spoken about this one as well. Let's then step up to the 5th of July. Okay. And we see above Velika Novosilka, this large area then filling in. This is exactly what we have been saying, is we're going to start seeing axes that have small kilometre squares but large tactical significance turn into large kilometre squares. No surprise to see that movement. I believe that is all we had then on the 5th, and then we'll go into then the 6th. We'll turn this off and back on again. We see some movement on the Pokrovsk eastern sector towards Popov Yar. We see around then this area Malinivkia on the east of Huliapol, more around Velika, Novosilkia front line as well. And then we have no more, sorry, I'm just trying to refresh my memory on all this. And then we come up to where we are today. So we're going to step up, back and forward a little bit on this. But Pokrovsk. Now, let's have a look at the eastern side of what Suryak is speaking about. So he's basically just saying that Russians are continuing to exploit these areas around here. Exactly what I said months ago on this front is they'll push north and then east and west, north and then east and west to try and desaturate any Ukrainian defenses in here. And again, pushing north, east and west, further out and building the eastern flank of Pokrovsk. So where we're talking about is we have Razene, and it's just all in this sector in here. Realistically, given what we've seen before, these maps aren't too different to themselves. Now, of course, a little bit more around the Mariupol area, but nothing dramatic. And what we've spoken about is this went up and then they needed to widen. And exactly what I spoke about, this widening now of, say, 20 kilometers means the saturation of Ukrainian drones and artillery and whatever else in here is going to be less, but you've also then opened up more lines of communication, logistics routes, everything into this area. Exactly why we're seeing Velika and Pokrovsk West meet up. Okay, you can scream orc all you want, but the strategy and tactics on the front line at the moment absolutely are in line with the attritional warfare doctrine. So this is why we are able to predict things. Okay, people say, you've had a lot of luck predicting. No, it's if we just work off the doctrine, because that's the doctrine they are working off. Now let's have a look at this, and this is what I found interesting. Was around this area, Mariupolskaya, Mykolaiivka front line, we saw at these two geolocations in here, we saw mechanized Russian assaults. Now, we don't really see much mechanized assault anymore due to the nature of the front line, not due to Russia's industry. Russia's industry is pumping out a shitload of armoured vehicles. Why? Well, NATO will say to attack NATO. That's bullshit. They are doing it in case they have breakthroughs at the front to be able to manoeuvre, mechanised manoeuvre, deep manoeuvre around the battlefield and rebuild what has been lost. But it's not due to industry, it's due to the nature of the front line that they're focusing more on smaller motorcycles, vehicles, foot. Now, this shows in the footage why we don't see these. We see a lot of losses in this, but we also need to take into account this was 4.5, 5 kilometres behind the line of control in this direction. And as the front continues to deteriorate, it is likely we'll see the reintroduction of mechanised warfare, maybe mechanised manoeuvre warfare, and that's if mechanised manoeuvre gets re-entered into the battlefield, I do not know what then NATO and Ukraine do, because leverage is going to be catastrophic at that point. If it's already difficult at the moment with Russia making 3-5 kilometres a day, what if we see mech manoeuvre where it's making significantly more? So this footage here, I'll chuck it up on Telegram. You can see a lot of these Russian armoured vehicles getting taken out. Exactly the reason we don't see much of this anymore, but apparently they were still able to drop off infantry in here according to according to Russian telegrams. Again, with any footage like this, it's hard because the way the Russian pages will edit and show it and the way the Ukrainian pages edit and show it, it is difficult. But I just wanted to focus on not the success or failure of that, but we're seeing some mech. We see the reason why there's not mech, but we may see mech re-enter the battlefield at some point too. So let's jump onto the maps and show you everywhere that is moving, including the area that I think is the most dangerous. Now, this is the wrap up of the month of June. We see Deep State and Syriac very, very close. So let's go. Likely it was around 560 kilometre squares, which is the largest gains we've seen for then a number of years, especially in the month of June, well over 4 times June the year prior. AMK mapping, he's given his numbers of around 650 kilometre squares, so we know it was a very large month. So let's then look at Terney front line in here. This is the area that concerns me the most because this pocket has been made in here, okay? That Ukraine is not assaulting across this. They're not bringing logistics across this waterway. I don't care what other mill bloggers say. It's not happening. Everything is coming up in this direction. What I've said, what I've been saying, is the Russians will not try and push further west. They'll just try and push north and south and expand, therefore reducing desaturation, increasing supply lines around Karpivka, Rivkida, but also expect to see Ukrainian counters because their commanders, they know this as well. And I'll say we will see counters to try and clear this up. And we are seeing some of this. So we are seeing Ukraine, at least he's saying that it's the shelling clear the area northeast of Kolyastivka, that there was an advancement by Ukraine in here. So they may try and then open up this northern route as well. So there's been some movement in there. And then we see what I've said in this pocket is I wouldn't be surprised if we see Russia lose some ground in here because their goal is attrition at the moment, not kilometre squares. They clarified the situation around the Novohorivkia area just in here. His map was slightly incorrect, but again, as I've said, I don't think the Russians will want to close this up. They'll keep this as a fatal funnel open, knowing they can push troops in here, only fight on a single front, but have an overmatch due to the logistics issue in here. And what I've said is they'll try and expand this. And according to Syriac map, it is exactly what we are seeing around Karpivka, Zeleny Dolnya, as well as in the direction of Hlushchenkove as well, trying to expand that in this direction too. Not surprised at all to be seeing that on the maps. And then let's push up into the north. Not seeing any more movements made around where the Russians pushed in Milove the other day. What are the odds that we see Russia open a new front while they're pushing on the south? Very high, given the doctrine of movements around here. Then we come up, we still have Vovchansk. They'll keep this in play because Ukraine needs to keep a number of forces here, as well as Sumy. And then we have Kino, where the Russians almost, or were, we're not really sure, but very close to at least, surrounded in here. And it does look, at least from Suryak, that they were able to push the Ukrainians back to the border according to his map in this direction. Now, let's move our way back down, and we're going to just stay on today's map. We have seen some significant ground made around Velika Novosilka. This area closing up, Pindubne, there's heaps of geolocations in there confirming that Russia occupied that, as well as this area, Rivnopol to Zeleny Polny, he's filling in. And what I said was, I don't believe there was any troops in here or in here for a number of weeks. I think it would wait to roll into then July, show this, but I think July will be a very large kilometre squares month. On the 4th of July, what did I say? I've deleted the thing. But on the 3rd or 4th, we already had over 100. So we see this and this exploitation of axes to turn into large gains. And Suryak maps, he's showing this to a greater extent again. So we have Velika Novosilka, Pidubne, and he's showing that this is moving more so like we would expect as a solid front, not just individual movements in here. That from Tolstoy down through Murnay to Komar, that this is all closed up. Likely, I believe it probably looks like that, and I think by the end of the month we'll see this close up. I'll keep kilometre squares updates as we go, and then further entry into then Murnay down here, Pidubne completely, and moving into Tolstoy, as well as further movements below Murnay as well, which we did see, I believe, in the day maybe prior or days prior. Did we see? Yeah, we see just some movement around Vasily Fedorivkia right there. So in this map here, so we see movement in that direction, and then up to, of course, today. Oh, I think I'm on the wrong one. Up to then today. So we can see there is definitely some movement and expansion of control in that sector as well. And he does talk around Dashne in here that Ukraine did push back some ground. What we did see is right where my cursor is, Russia raised a flag maybe 4 days ago, and then we know Ukraine, they raised a flag in here today. So the Russians were definitely on that side of the Vovcha. It looks like there may have been a pushback in there. Holding on that side of the waterway is going to be very tough. Now, let's move up to the area that concerns me second to Terny. Maybe more, if correct. Seversk. Seversk has held for a very long time, for years. The Russian command, the Russian troops, they comment on how good Ukraine's defense is in this sector. And now it's moving. That tells us a lot about attrition, situation on the front line, and effectiveness of tactics as well. Why do you think two or 3 weeks ago I showed you the first blocks of Seversk were getting fucking hammered by FABs? That's not for nothing, because what I said was between Verkhonomayansky and Seversk, there's nothing. Dead flat and open paddocks. They're hammering all of those areas. And we see, at least according to Suryak, the Russians are right up into here, as well as all the way through Serebryankia as well. He's saying they've captured completely the eastern part of this. So weighed out on this, but there is more maps than just Suryak suggesting this movement. There's some that have saying that the Russian forces are within, he's saying the main trenches here, but some saying that they are right up close into the final defense positions before entering Seversk itself. You can see this envelopment here and what exploitation will occur on the flanks targeting as well. So weighed out on that, but we are definitely seeing some movements here, and we're seeing Chasiv Yar just to the south of here, Herovkia, also movements according to Suryak as well. So we see where the canal is here, and then pushing up onto the eastern side of Novomakove onto that canal. Crossing the canal is going to be very, very difficult. We see the canal runs through here. I've had a few guys reach out to me who are operating around Ukraine who have said we should have actually put a lot more assets to stop them at the canal in Chasiv Yar. We could have really, really attrited there, but we were too focused on the kilometre squares all the way north in Sumy. in Kursk, apologies. So we've covered all of the map movements today. Again, it's a little bit difficult when you've got a couple of days you've missed, apologies. Now, fighter bomber, who, of course, he's pro-Russian. He's a Russian guy. He used to fly fucking fighter aircraft. So, of course, there's bias. But, of course, there's bias on all pages. I will say, though, his track record is very, very good for self-confirmations and talking about issues within the Russian Air Force as well. So, let's have a look. What is the situation with combat aviation? Overall, things are more or less the same. Strategic and long-range bombers, they're launching cruise missiles of various types. These are your Tu-22s, 160s aren't really that involved. Probably more involved now that a few Tu-22s and 95s have been lost. And of course, Tu-95s, MiG-31, Foxhound, and continues with the Kinzhal, Army Aviation Close Air Support, unguided rockets because they don't want to move too close due to manpad. Army units also support air defence and dealing with numerous UAVs. We see a lot of drones and also analogues of Garans being used by Ukraine into Russia as well. Frontline bombers, they're primarily using frontline bombers, Su-34s, UMPK, so the typical glide bombs, the guided planning bomb, the UMPB, that new variant that we're seeing, and KH-38ML, short to medium range air-to-surface guided missile with a laser seeker, laser designator on that as well. Okay, all things that we are seeing. Fighter aviation, so things like Su-35s, is focused on hunting down enemy aircraft, destroying enemy radar systems. So seed and deed missions, because of course they want more dominance over the sky and localized superiority. Hunting down enemy aircraft. This is something we have spoken about, which can be involved in the Garans too. We have seen a number of F-16s destroyed, taken down, and saddened pilots lost in Garan wave attacks. And there has been Russian pages comment, I can't remember if it was fighter bomber or not, saying that in the Garan, when the Garans go up, we know that F-16 is going to go up. Therefore, we can send up planes, not into Ukrainian airspace, but planes with long-range air-to-air missiles and try and hunt down some of these as well, including if it becomes, if the opportunity presents itself when the Su-34s are coming into fold, which of course fighter aircraft may go up to intercept. That Su-34 is flying in tandem with Su-35. Su-34, of course, has UMPK, UMPB aboard, the guide bombs. The Su-35 has air-to-air missiles, and if the Su-34 or it starts getting lased, it will go after that and try and protect the Su-34. Okay, it's all things that we take into account in massive, large-scale war. And now, in the fourth year of the war, something unprecedented has happened in Laos, which they talk about for the command. He talks about this a lot. Fighter pilots have been allowed to act independently without waiting for commands, requests, reports, logs, or having to pass evaluations. So then using their own experience to make decisions on the fly. Fighter pilots have been allowed to act independently. They can now use tactics they see as appropriate in real time, so speeding up the chain. Not all pilots or units are granted this freedom yet, but it's seen as a breakthrough comparable in significance to the first flight into space. So, of course, talking about how the massive breakthrough Sputnik event, they're trying to compare that, but giving further, I can't remember the word I'm looking for, but being able to act independently, make decisions, increasing that speed if you're experienced. So therefore, you may end up increasing the effectiveness on the front line, not this completely stagnant system that can happen in Soviet-era doctrine. I know a lot more about the ground area of that than in the air, but I'd say it's very similar. They've been allowed to cross the forward line of contact, so actually crossing into Ukrainian-held territory. There have also been cases of close air combat, known in the West as dogfights, using short-range air-to-air missiles at distances to 6 to 7 kilometres between aircraft. Something, I don't know, that speculation, I don't know if there's actually been dogfights in the past, ever since the very beginning in this, especially at that range, but maybe we will see. It's too early to assess their effectiveness, but the trend is certainly encouraging. And again, the Russian aviation, I believe, was the weakest. We overestimated, and not when I say we, the West overestimated, but also Russia massively overestimated the VKS strength. But then I think we also underestimated how good modern to even older air defence actually actually is too, because I've been so critical on the Russian air defense, which I think is Russian air assets, VKS, for not being able to get superiority or dominance in sectors over years as well. Local dominance, but not wider. But then we saw that America failed to gain air superiority over Yemen. And what I said was, of course, Yemen is a much, much lighter foe than Ukraine. But America, of course, is a much more powerful air force in that area as well. So what we can talk about is the disparity is probably similar. And we saw that happen too, with even close calls against F-35s, F-18s, etc. That maybe we were a bit harsh on air superiority within the first days. And what I will say, as far as air superiority in Iran, I actually think Mossad has had as much influence on that as actually the air warfare did as well, if that makes sense. I actually think the Mossad had, I think in the initial opening days of Iran, the most impressive was actually the Israeli Mossad striking those systems, more so than gaining air defense through air operation too. Anyway, but the trend line is definitely going in that way. I don't agree with everything that Fighter Bomber says here, but the Quran's tying up air defense. We see more aircraft working. We see significantly fewer aircraft losses than we did. We see UAC still pumping out aircraft. It is definitely going in the direction of increased air warfare as well. I don't think Russia will ever gain air superiority over this. They don't need it. They just need it in localized sectors, or to be able to fly uninhibited and drop glide bombs, which the Su-34s may as well have air superiority, because they can drop a glide bomb basically anywhere within 30, 40 Ks behind the line of control. And we haven't seen a Su-34. Russia's shot down and lost due to mechanical problems more Su-34s than Ukraine has hit in a year, maybe more. And as I've shared, I followed UAC and only go off visually confirmed rolling off the production line. And it seems to me that the numbers, they're actually in positive attrition of those aircraft. Legends, you have a fantastic day, and I will speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.